Hello everyone, today we are going to be looking at diphthongs. And this is something that is discussed in the brochure in a lot of places. You can find it, and obviously, as always, it would be a good idea for you to stop the video, take out your brochure, and perhaps find these places beforehand. That way you can kind of go along as we go. So the first place is going to be in the opening pages where we have, if you remember, we had the consonants and the vowels. And right after the vowels, actually part of the vowels, we had diphthongs. And diphthongs, it's important, we can maybe start by the definition. They are two sounds in one syllable, right? We've already discussed this briefly, but I want to make sure that you're sure about these two aspects. If we might as well look at an example of a diphthong, and we're going to see this played out. We're going to have a diphthong that you've already seen, which we have a, which you're aware that this is the long value for a, right? And if I give you a word like cake, right, which would be a good illustration of this sound, right? You can hear that a, you can hear the letter a, right? What we call the citation value. You can hear that sound in the word cake. You can hear the letter a, cake, a, cake. So you say, yes, that's a sound. That's a long value. And if I ask you how many, if I ask you to give, let's say, tell me whether this syllable is stressed, you'll give me the stressed syllable here. Notice you'll have nothing here. This is a silent E. It's a one syllable word. So yes, we all agree, I think, that we have one syllable. So we don't say cake, right? It holds itself together. If you remember, we've already looked at syllable structure, where we've had that central vocalic part, that's a vowel, where we may have additional optional consonants. Here, as it turns out, we have a consonant before and after, right? But this is sort of a structural definition of a syllable. And just to reassure ourselves that yes, we, according to our structural definition of a syllable, this is a one syllable word, right? This vowel sound only doesn't go more than, let's say, one syllable in length. So that means this A is one syllable, but we have two sounds, right? And this is something that is specific to English. In French, it doesn't happen this way. In French, you're going to say naïve, and that's going to be a two-syllable word, right? We have two different vowel sounds, and each one is its own syllable. So this is something that is specific to English, and what else is specific to English is that we can't just mix any two sounds to have a diphthong, right? There are only 8, right? So it's a good idea to familiarize yourself with them. And then you can really, I would say, really become more aware of kind of the standard sound patterns of English, and you'll probably gain in confidence, and you'll be a little bit more natural, and you won't be kind of in between two sounds. You'll be sort of in the right zone, if you were, right? So it's easier if you sort of tell yourself, okay, there are only 8 combinations, right? There are only 8 diphthongs, which means there are only 8 combinations of two sounds to have one syllable. And we usually divide them up into 3 groups. And this is the way they are divided up in the brochure. Now, on page 7 of the brochure. You can find the description of the diphthongs. Now, it's only broken down into 2. We have what are referred to as the centering diphthongs, right? We might as well start with we'll start with the bottom. We'll start with those. Notice we divide diphthongs into 3 groups, right? The first group, and according to the final sound, right? So the centering diphthongs, we'll just write them down. I, U, right? And so all 3 of these, we've regrouped them because they have the same final sound. Now we're going backwards here. There's another series that is going to. These are here. We have notice we have the closing diphthongs is the second group on page 7. Now we can further break this down into 2 groups as opposed to just one, and we can have the sort of the low closing and the high closing diphthongs, right? The low closing are going to be this. We're going to look at this a little bit more in detail. O and ow, those are the 2 low closing, because that ends with this sound. And then the high closing diphthongs are going to be A, I, and oi. Okay, so notice, so here we have 8, right? We have 3, 2, and 3, right? Which gives us 8. And once again, we've divided them into sort of the final sound. Notice there is a diagram for this. You can kind of, by yourself, all these arrows, right? You can notice here we are, once again, we're on page 7. These arrows sort of give an indication of where we're moving on the vowel chart, right? For example, here we have something like, for example, A, that's going to be this arrow, A, right? I, that's going to be I, that's going to be oi, oi, I, right? Okay, you can kind of see the way we're kind of moving here. Here we have O and ow, here we have O, ow. Here on the bottom we have, we're going to have E, A, and ua. I'm sorry. Ia, ea, and ua. So this is just to sort of show you that this is sort of the motion that this is saying, that we're moving from one sound to another. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that we spend more time on this first sound than on the second one. It's sort of like a little exponential jump at the end. For example, when we say cake, if we listen to that in slow motion, we're going cake, right? That we kind of hike up at the end, you know, cake, right? So you don't want to go cake, you want to go cake, you know, and this would be like might, you know, oi, oi. We spend more time, about 3/4 or 2/3, 3/4 of the time on that first sound, and then we kind of accelerate, if you will, to make that second sound, right? So let's just go through and see what they are. So that is sort of a resume of what you see on page 7, and now we're going to go through. And we're going to kind of go through each group, just so you can find yourself in the brochure. This first series, right, which we've called the high closing, they can also be referred to as the high rising diphthongs. These ones, you can find a discussion of these with examples, and you can practice with the exercises on page 27 and page 29 of the brochure, right? I'll just say them all now. These next ones, which are called the low closing, or these will be on page 30. You can find explanations for these. And for the centering diphthongs, they've divided them into the first 2 and then the second one. The 3 of these will be discussed on page 32. So once you've finished with this lesson, you can go and practice with the exercises in the brochure, and also you can read the shorter explanation in the brochure. So I'm going to do it sort of all together, you know, as this lesson, right? So you're already familiar with 3 of these, right? And notice here we have A, I, and you know this. These are the long values, right? You know that this is the long value for A, so I can just write cake, right? And this I, that's the long value for I, so we could do something like Mike, right? Great. So that's there's nothing really to say. Those sounds, we've seen these sounds before. I would just say try to, once again, when making these, a reminder, long values. Of course, these are always going to be stressed. So yet another example of how important it is to really clearly distinguish between a stressed and a non-stressed syllable, and you want to really shorten, right, and reduce in intensity the non-stressed syllables to allow yourself to lengthen and to give yourself some dynamic range for the stressed syllables. So that way you can say cake, right? You don't want to say kick. You want to really kind of expand that, and it's especially true of diphthongs among the stressed syllables. So cake. Mike, you can practice saying this yourself, you know, cake. You you want to kind of loosen up. And once again, in French, by the way, this is going to be similar to just the it sound, right? And in English, ache, you know, cake, Mike, right? So try to give yourself the time and make them kind of round. It's kind of like a rounded movement, right? And then this second one, it usually corresponds with a digraph. It's either going to represent an O, typically at least, an OI or an OY spelling, right? So I could say something like void or boy, right? Okay, that is what you were, and these are pronounced perfectly in the same way. And as we know, the I and the Y, this is sort of just a spelling convention. If I write boy, Y the last letter. If I say void, if I have a consonant after it, we will have the I instead of the Y. But it's essentially the same sound. Okay, so we're finished with that, right? And once again, in all of these cases, all 8 of these examples, we're talking about one syllable, right? So now we're going to look at another. Now we're looking at the next series, right? Which are, and it's just easier to have to represent in this way. It's to remember what they are, and it helps you to memorize them. You know, because you're going to memorize them. You can kind of start by saying, okay, I drew the 3 series. I can start with the second sound, and then you can, because you should be able to write these yourself, as you know. It's the best way to learn. So now we're moving into our second series, and the first one is going to sort of form, a trifecta with the 2 other long values. The first one is a long value for O. So if I say sort of like hope, right? Yeah, that is the long value which we've encountered, and that first sound is going to be the schwa. So ope, right? The second sound is like the third of the high closing diphthongs. This one is going to be typically represented by a digraph, usually the OU or the OW, which OU and OW can be pronounced in a lot of different ways, but this is, I would say, one of the primary ways that they are in words such as sound or something like cow, ow, ow. So and it's important to distinguish this. Here we have this this A-like symbol, and here we have our schwa, o, ow, o, ow, and once again it's that first sound where they differ, right? And now let's finally move on to our last sounds. Now these last sounds, this last series I should say, we call these the centering diphthongs. Centering diphthongs because, as is evident on page 7 on this vowel chart, we end in the center. We get here, by the way, we're getting tensor, ai, right? And on the high closing, here with the centering diphthongs, right, we're getting less tense, right? We've already seen that the schwa is lax, right? Meaning that there is really no, it sort of occurs in the center of your mouth, and there is sort of no muscle tension to make this sound. And it sort of involves more of what we might call a release, right? Now these diphthongs it's important to remind ourselves that we are looking at British English, what is known as received pronunciation, right? And in received pronunciation, most of these sounds, right, most always when we encounter a centering diphthong, in British English, RP, received pronunciation, right, which we think of as just this proper English, is when we're going to have a silent R, right? So, for example, I think I might start with the one in the middle because it's most obvious. If I say something like there, right? Here we notice we have this R, right? Okay. And here, if we're going to transcribe this, we have our th, right? We have our interdental fricative that's voiced. That here we have the short value for e, right? With that, which is kind of, notice we're not saying e, we're saying right? It's a shorter, duller value. And then we have this silent R, there, right? And in British English, this involves a sort of I would say sort of a loosening and a sort of a deflation at the end of the syllable. So we're going to move on to there, a sort of a shift into a less tense vowel. There, right? So that is what is going on here. Now, so here we're starting with a short value and we're blending into the lax schwa, right? And here we're starting with, the next two might be a little bit deceptive phonetically, or they might go against your intuition. Here, what you're probably going to hear, well, I'm saying here, right? If I say a word like here you can notice, you can sort of hear the E sound, right? And we've already encountered this E sound as the long value for E, right? So in a sense, you can think of this being the long value for E plus a silent R. But notice we don't write this long value for E. You kind of hear it, but it isn't the pattern that we have for diphthongs. So if I'm going to transcribe here, you just write the diphthong. You do not write the long value for E, and that's sort of the trap. So that is sort of part of your memorization, to train yourself in these kind of songs, right? And as you're well aware that there can be other spelling combinations. Here we have the RE. I could write something like Bia, right? B-E-R, right? Okay. So there are other spelling combinations that you should be aware of. So try to really use your ears and be aware of the fact that you could represent this ia sound in many ways, and do not write the long value. Just become aware of that convention. Similarly, when we have the ua, right, here and it's difficult to say. I'm an American speaker, so I find it somewhat difficult. Here that you might kind of hear the long value for you, like cute, right, mute, right? So we have this. So if we say a word like cure, right? Okay, or like cure, you hear this you can hear that. And once again, with this long value for you, we have this yod, this little J symbol, e, which sounds like an E, right? We have this sort of, so if we have this, we may have this yod, if you know, in that occurs in most, when we have the long value most of the time, we might have this yod, but just like what we've had for the long value for E, we don't reproduce this long value for, you might hear it as the long value for you, like cure, you might hear it, but we use this alternative short value for you, which we've seen in words like bush or should, right? We use this symbol followed by a diphthong. So here, if I'm to transcribe cure, I'll write cure, right? Cure. And that, once again, just like the here, cure, involves, I would say, some kind of discipline, because you might kind of be tempted to write the long value in. So that is something to be aware of. So that is pretty much it for the diphthongs. It's sort of an overview. I think it's more about you becoming familiar with these things and doing practice. So that's really all I'm going to ask you to do for this week. I'm going to send next week I'll send you a reminder of the fact that our evaluation is going to involve really a final test, and I'll start talking about that some more. But just keep continuing with what you're doing. I hope that you are enjoying the time that you spend at home, and that it's going well for you. So we will be in touch next week. Take care.